Hey guys, I love talking to other people in the podcasting industry. And Justin and I have connected a couple of times. Adore you, Justin. And you are, of course, the host of a top rated show, Growth Now Movement, and is actually named one of the top 8 podcasters to follow in Inc. magazine and founder of Pod Brand. And yeah, we have the same approach. You were super easygoing. So I'm super excited to have you on the show.
Yeah, Lindsay, I'm excited to be here and have this conversation, and we'll keep the cursing for off the recordings. So that's what we'll do.
Yes.
We'll just hold off till after we're done.
Exactly. We'll stockpile it. For those of you that are like, what? We were just talking about how like some people swear on the show and some people don't. Some people say, is it okay? And we were talking about how we swear like truckers in our own lives, but just not on air.
Yeah,
Very little secrets.
I love it.
Yeah. So how long have you had the podcast for, the Growth Now movement? And what do you think really catapulted that success?
Yeah, so I've been podcasting for 6.5 years.
Wow.
If I'm maybe a little bit more than 6.5 years
Yeah.
now. And so to kind of put that in perspective, as people are listening to this, I used to tell people I had a podcast, and their response would be, "What's a podcast?"
Yeah, I know.
And so now I tell people I have a podcast and they roll their eyes and they go, "Oh, you have one too." Right. Like, cause it's grown so much over the
Yeah.
last 6.5 years. Actually, it's funny. So I'm an avid cigar smoker. Like, I love a good cigar and the company that comes with it.
With
And
whiskey?
there's a local lounge near me. And I went there one day, and I usually go like Monday and Monday afternoon. Right. And I'm sitting there and I'm sitting next to a guy who's probably 85. And he's just like, "So what do you do?" And I was like, "Oh, I have a podcast." And he was like, "I love podcasts." And I was like, this medium has grown so
Yeah.
much over the last 6.5 years. And I just love seeing it, because I was fully expecting to explain to him, "Oh,
Oh,
well, it's kind of
totally.
like radio, but it's not.
I know now.
So
Sweet
it's
for
just
you.
amazing to see the growth. But I
Yeah.
think for me, it's funny, when I first started to want, like, when I was like, I want to do a podcast, my idea behind it was I wanted to interview entrepreneurs, pick their brain, and try and become a better entrepreneur. Because at that point I had 3 failed businesses, and I was like, it's really a great tool for me to do that. And I was like, in the back of my head, I was like, oh, maybe some people will listen, and maybe I can grow a brand, but that
Yeah.
wasn't really the main reason. And what ended up happening was, 6 months before I launched the show, my mom lost a 20-year battle to opioids,
Oh,
and it completely changed my idea of life in general. And
yeah.
so what ended up happening was I started to have these conversations with entrepreneurs and celebrities and all these other people about their rock bottom moments, and about how they
Mm.
overcame them, and how they found self-love in those moments. And really, the first 2 years were about me trying to find self-love. So the questions were
Yeah.
for me, right? And so I honestly can say, I think the true first good thing I did was I stayed true to who I was. I was vulnerable. I wasn't trying to be somebody else.
Yeah.
And I was just really honest and open in my conversations. And I think at the time that really resonated with people. There's some other people that do it in the space, but back then there's probably only 1 or 2 people doing it as authentically as me. And I
No.
think that that's really why I had that early success. And then, of course, we can talk technical stuff
Yeah.
too, as far as like the branding and how I promoted it, and how I got my guests to promote it. So all those things were important, but the number one thing was
Yeah.
everything really fell in line with my messaging, the purpose that I had behind it, and the branding that I set it up with. And really, that's how it all kind of started.
I love how you shared that because not a lot of people talk about that element of it. And on 2 different points, one is kind of doing the podcast so that you could learn. Because I remember when I first started out, it was totally like, I want to interview who I can like pick their brain on and like
Yeah.
learn stuff. And then the part for you about being super, everyone uses the word authentic, but being the real you and having like meaningful conversations and building those relationships and talking about the things that other people aren't talking about. And that to me is what I love about podcasting, because it's not just about tips and tricks, like it's in strategies, it's real people, real stories, real connections resonating with people. And I think that's like the real power behind it.
Yeah, 100%, right? Like, so it's also the only long form medium that people consume anymore, right?
Yeah.
So I love asking people the question, like, do you know what the average Facebook video view time is? And it's 8 seconds.
Crazy.
Which is so crazy to think about. Like, so people are like, "Oh yeah, I'm a live streamer. I get 1,000 views." I'm like, yeah, 8 seconds a clip. Like nobody's really absorbing what you're saying, right? You might
Yeah.
have 1 or 2 people that hang around. But in podcasting, I think the statistic is, at least last I checked,
Yeah.
it was like 80% of your audience will listen to 80% or more of every single episode.
Yeah.
And so people are so engaged in the conversation. And so it's really neat to have great guests on. But what I say is they might find you because you have a cool guest, but they're going to stick around because you're a good host, right? Because they feel like they really build that relationship with you. So otherwise, why would they spend 30, 45 minutes, 60 minutes with you every single week? Right. But it's really the only medium out there that's like that. And that's one of the things that I love about it. And honestly, you can talk about anything you want. You can niche down into a niche, into a niche, into a niche. Yeah. And there's still going to be an audience for you, whether that's 100 people or 1,000 people or 1,000,000 people. There's always going to be an audience for you, and you can talk about what you want to talk about.
I know, you have total control. It's awesome. And it's so much fun. Like you can't beat it. I love that you've had that success. That is so great. And as you were saying, like videos within Facebook and how much, it doesn't have necessarily a long shelf life. However, especially nowadays, it does still hold value in capturing people's attention, and creating that high quality, social media content to spin off your podcast. So of course you have Pod Brand, and you obviously had success in capturing people's attention. So just want to talk to that a little bit more. And I know branding is like a big part of it as well.
Yeah. So Pod Brand came about because I realized the reality of podcasting, which is 80% of shows do less than 100 downloads an episode. Mm-hmm. Right. But I also know that most people who start a podcast feel like they have something to say and an important message, and they want to make an impact in the world, whether that's helping people with their business, whether it's helping people with their podcast like you or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, how do you break that stigma? And by the way, for 6+ years, 80% of shows are doing less than 100 downloads. So the reality is, to break through is very, very tough, but it doesn't mean that content should go, unused or wasted or whatever. Absolutely. And so when I looked at the idea behind Pod Brand, I was like, let's have people's messages and brands be heard. And so the way we do that is we make algorithm friendly content for social media from their podcast itself. Because podcasting is, again, that long form medium where you can then go and pull content for days from, mm-hmm. if you really, really wanted to, as long as you're having a poignant conversation and you're not babbling on like I am right now. But the reality is, like, it's the greatest opportunity to be seen. Yeah. And so I used to teach in podcasting how to grow your audience. I used to literally speak at events, and I would say 5 ways to grow your podcast audience, right? And there were actionable things you could do. And it would certainly grow your audience back then, right? When there was 400,000 podcasts versus 2 million. There's been such a shift in the landscape that what I talk about now is a 3 Ps behind podcasting, which is platform building, positioning, mm-hmm. and then partnership. And those 3 Ps not only grow your reach, your brand, but it also levels up your people's perception of you. And then therefore they'll pay you more on the sponsorship side or partnership side. And the first step in that is creating great branding on your social media across the board, to really highlight you, your content, and what you're bringing to the table. And then you can follow through the process from there. Yeah.
I love that. As soon as you said it, I'm like, that's things I do and what have you. But when you like condense it into like a formula, so to speak, you're like, oh, that all makes so much sense.
Yeah.
But you really made it concise, because that's exactly it. That's perfect.
Yeah. And once it's funny, like I talk about the platform, which is the branding, which is what we do with Pod Brand for podcasters. And we've made it as affordable as possible. The second part is positioning, right? The number one question I get the most whenever I'm interviewed or whatever is, how do you get these big names on your shows? Like, how do you get all these great people on your show? And it's really about, number one, you have to set yourself up the right way. You better look professional, right? Like imagine if Target had terrible branding, they wouldn't still be in business, right? No. Everything's clean, concise, like everything looks good. And you know what you're getting when you walk into a store. The second piece is to ask in the right way, right? To really just reach out to these individuals that you want on your show, and to be able to ask in the right way. And what it does by having these big names on your show, and why people are so curious, is because it positions you at a higher level, right? Yep. Like I've had, I believe it's 2 or 3 companies now reach out to me and say, hey, we saw that you had 𝗵𝗵𝗶𝗆𝗀 on your show. We'd love to sponsor you. and they gave me a dollar
Wow.
amount without ever asking for a download number. They didn't ask me for any of that stuff. But this company wanted to position itself with organizations that can position itself with people like
Yeah.
Gabby, right? So there's great power in having those types of conversations. Plus, it's a ton of fun. Like,
Yeah.
imagine just being like, I get to sit down with people that I look up to, people that I love,
Yeah.
absorbing their content and reading their books and doing all this stuff. But you have to be able to ask in the right way. So that, again, that's why those two steps are important, right? You have to look good because they're not going to say yes unless you're presented professionally. No. And then the second piece is you just have to ask in the right way. And I guarantee you, your success rate is going to go through the roof.
Yeah, I agree. And we could have a whole conversation of asking the right way and the wrong way.
Yes. Yes. Very often, I'm sure you too, like you get asked the wrong way constantly.
Like, what the bacon people? Yeah, absolutely. So let's go into the branding and the content part of it. And I love what you said about we have this long form content. L is my favorite letter for leveraging, not just Lindsay, but for leveraging that content and repurposing it to capture people's attention. So what is your favorite thing to do with your podcast?
Yeah, for me, it's two things, right? So number one, obviously finding the clips that matter, right? What's the impactful thing that was said that's going to stand out? We keep it as short as possible. I just told you the 8-second rule.
Exactly.
So within the 8 seconds, there better be something good enough in that clip that's going to make somebody want to stick around, whether it's the powerful question, whether it's a powerful statement, something that keeps them around. But right now, I mean, obviously, look, we always play to the algorithm of social media. So Instagram doesn't show photos anymore. Sadly, like people will see it in your stories.
Crazy.
It's so crazy. And to kind of give people another perspective, like reality of what they're doing. I have 6,000 followers on Instagram. When I post an image, the average amount of people they show it to is about 120 people. So that's just terrible, right? So when I create a reel, which is the vertical setup of a video that's branded the right way, that captures, I mean, we're talking 14,000 views, 15,000 views. And if you get super viral, I just had one on Facebook go to 6.6 million views.
Wow.
Which is crazy. It was a fluke. I wish I could reproduce that every single time, but it worked out.
Yeah.
And I feel blessed that happened. But with that being said, like, I really love the short form video content that then grabs people enough to say, okay, him or her is worth a follow.
Yes.
Right. It's really, really hard to get somebody to stop their death scroll on social media, right? The next, double tap that one, next, right? So how do you get them from doing that to then having them follow you, then click a link, then click download and do all those things, right? And so that's why we talk about platform building versus download growth numbers, because it's a lot harder to convert them. There's a longer process from, okay, the first step is engaging content. And you do that through Reels, which is now, by the way, across the board, Reels are hot except for LinkedIn. So Instagram, Facebook, and then they call them YouTube Shorts. So it's the same format on YouTube as well. But then, cool, if it's engaging enough, they'll stop, they might interact, and then hopefully they'll give you a follow, right? And then from there, you begin to nurture that relationship on social media. Then hopefully they get turned into a podcast listener. That's a whole different conversation, but from what kind of content you should be creating, just understand what's working and what's not, right? And right now, Reels is working. We could be having this conversation in a year and it might be something completely different, but they're real heavy on video content that's formatted the right way. Make sure there's no blank spaces, all these things. Reels, they crush every single time. So I'm going to stick with that for a while. And I imagine they'll be around for a while, I'm sure.
I think so too. I think, people just consume the hell out of it. And look at TikTok. Like, it's insane.
Yeah.
I haven't, do you have a TikTok account?
I do. I kind of forget about it a lot. But with that being said, I found out that TikTok has made a deal with Google that they will now be searchable through Google. So TikTok videos are now going to be searchable through Google. So it is unfortunately a game that we're all going to have to play.
Know. I'm like, one of my clients just broke down and got an account. I'm like, oh man, does that mean I have to as well?
The nice part is though, whatever reels you're creating right now for your content, it's the same as TikTok.
Yeah, totally. I know. It feels so overwhelming. And of course, everyone was making all the square videos, but of course, you put those on Instagram now and it's like, blah. It just feels like the market just changes constantly and you got to like pivot and like relearn crap and blah, blah, blah. So it feels really kind of overwhelming. Now,
Yeah.
so let's break it down for people, because some people are like, okay, I see reels on Facebook and Instagram and stuff like that, but how do I make them for myself? Like, how long should they be? What should they be about? Like, there's so many different types, right?
Yeah. So again, this is forever changing too. I mean, if we had this conversation, I think like 6 months ago, I
Oh,
think the longest reel you could have was
absolutely.
30 seconds. So they went from 30 seconds, then to 60 seconds. And now I believe you can go 90
90.
seconds. And then on TikTok, it's like 180 seconds or something. Like they've gone into a little bit longer form content. I like to keep my reels under 60 seconds.
Me too.
Same with our clients that we work with, just because the engagement seems to be a little bit better. They show to more people. And then beyond that, people watch the whole thing. And that's really the goal, right? We want them to get to the end point. What's cool? It might be a good question, but we want the person to have the answer, right? Because again, we're going, I'm putting out this content. How do I reach as many people as possible with this content and make the impact I want to make for them to get the lesson? And so I try to keep it under 60 seconds. You know, you can play the longer game if you think it's a good enough clip, and go 90 seconds or even more on TikTok, whatever you're looking for. But I certainly say 60 seconds. I don't know the exact sizes, but it's the size of your phone, right? From a vertical standpoint. Now, if you ask me how to actually
their template as well.
Yeah. And if you ask me how to actually go in and edit your videos to do that, I have no idea. I've got an amazing team at Pod Brand that does that for me and my clients. But with that being said, I mean, it's definitely possible if you figure it out. And there's apps too that can help you out with that. So it's always there.
For sure. So clearly because some podcasters don't even record the video end of their podcast.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I guess you could have audiogram versions or images with moving backgrounds or whatever, but people like to see faces.
100%. And I'll share this with you. So when I started the podcast, I had a YouTube channel, and I started to put videos up, and I was like, this is too time consuming. Nobody wants to watch two people sitting next to each other like this, long form, having a conversation. And so my audio from my podcast would just load to YouTube, right? And my YouTube channel never got any traction. Then the pandemic hit, and everybody sat around and watched two people sitting next to each other having a conversation. And I was like, I missed the boat on this, right? And so what I've realized since the beginning of the pandemic specifically, video podcasting has gone through the roof.
Yeah.
And I actually used to be the guy who goes, that's not even a podcast. That's a video. Like I used to be that person.
That's funny.
But the reality is, like you just said, people want to see faces. People want to see body language. And the funny part was about my pushback of that is I realized I don't actually listen to podcasts. I watch them. So I had this weird internal dialogue of like, well, it's not a podcast. So I didn't do it. And it was a big mistake on my part. And then I really went heavy the last number of months on YouTube. And so that's finally starting to grow for me. But again, I missed the boat. So yes, I believe you should absolutely 100% record video content from your podcast. Utilize it in any way you possibly can. Even if you don't want to do the long form stuff, just create it for short form. That's what people want. And the idea is, hey, I want to grow my followers. I want to grow my business. I want to grow my podcast. Well, you better have good content on social media. That's the way to do it.
Yeah, 100%. So when I'm very like visual and logistical in my brain. So I just want to support those listeners that are kind of new in their podcasting and what have you. So because some people just need to have a picture painted. So what parts of the podcast would you actually take, like just to kind of give them some ideas of the approach to take, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So it's there's not necessarily like a specific part of the podcast. For me, it's like, where was the big swing and the home run hit, right? Like what was the good content that was taken out of the episode itself, but also in context, the entire conversation. So like if I have a conversation with somebody and we talk about nutrition, I don't want to pull a clip where she or he happens to be talking about a relationship they had.
Yeah.
Right. So you want to take the best of the best. It's the highlight reels, right? Like I was like, it's like the top 10 on the week on Sports Center, right? Like that's the greatest clips to watch. Why? Because it's the best. So you take the greatest clip in context to the overall subject of the episode. And that's what you want to use. I'm not big on using more than 2 clips from every single episode. I think it's overkill after that. If you don't catch them in the first two, they're just not the right person to listen to that episode.
Yeah.
So don't over, like, I mean, I know some people are like, I want 15 clips from every
Yeah.
episode.
Yeah.
Like, just might as well time stamp it out and cut it up.
I am
so
glad
I always
you said
say
that.
the best content that speaks to the overall arching subject of what you're talking about on the episode. That's really what you want to look for. Or something funny. And I know this doesn't always work for everybody.
Yeah.
But funny stuff really, really works.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I haven't done it for myself personally because my subjects on my show tend to be a little serious. But I have seen some clips. Like one was like it was a podcast and they were like, what's an animal that a human could take 100 of them? Like it was 1 versus 100 of this animal. What animal do you think we could take? And it was however the person answered was hilarious. And the video went viral because of how funny and engaging it was. Now that person probably didn't turn. I didn't turn into a podcast subscriber to them, but I certainly. But it captured your attention, right? And so if you can go funny, if that's your personality, go there as well.
Yeah, for sure. And same with like for me, it's like trying to pull something out that invokes curiosity, like especially too if it's like step 1 of a 3-part process. Here's the one. And then obviously in the comment, it's like, hey, there's 2 more. You can go to the podcast to check it out kind of a thing.
Yeah, for sure. And so I'm really big on the copy being the hook. So what are you writing with that video clip? Because number one, you do have to still stop them in order to watch the whole video. So I'm really big on the hook being within the written copy of the social media post. So say you're talking about divorce, you type, the first line should be something along the lines of trying to avoid divorce. Yeah. Right. Because that clip isn't going to save their marriage. So at the very, very end, you're going to go, you'll want to listen to the episode for more tips and tricks that you can take into your relationship to save it or whatever. Yeah. Right. So yeah, I'm really, really big on the copy itself being a hook.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. Because some people may not even know that there's copy that goes with it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I always read the copy too, which is funny. Yeah. I don't know if everybody's like that, but I always do.
I do. I always hit the little elliptical so I could read the rest of it.
Yeah. And then I go, wait, how do I shrink this back down after I read it? I'm like, now I want to see the video.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. That's so funny. And of course there's hashtags in there and emojis and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
And so are stories, do you find, still being active, or are people just beelining to the reels and Instagram?
So what I know about social media is the story is not going to grow your following. The stories are there to engage the people that are already following you. And so when we think about that, we create still images for the stories. Obviously you want to share the reel as well. It helps with your views and reach and stuff like that. But still images along with clickable links in your stories seems to be the go-to, because now everybody can put that clickable link. Yes, and so we'll create still images for clients. We'll put it in their Instagram story. They will then, put up the link of like, and you type listen on Spotify or listen on iTunes. And so it's a nice play to kind of utilize kind of more in-depth touch to the people that are following you. Very rarely do I not have something in my story. I'm not an overuser of stories, but like if you went to my Instagram profile now, there's a couple things on there right now. So there's always something there. And that's just to engage, make people laugh, interact, and then, obviously get them to click over to the podcast.
For sure. Admittedly, I'm not fantastic on Instagram. I'm all about LinkedIn and I'm in there and I love it. I'm like, oh yeah, I got to give attention to my little eye baby over there. I'm like, damn it.
Yeah. And it's funny. I'm the opposite. I enjoy Instagram as a platform. But LinkedIn specific. I mean, if you are like for you, like a podcast about podcasts or like a business podcast, if you're not playing heavy on LinkedIn, you're missing the boat. Mm-hmm. Like those people want content that specifically teaches them, what to listen to. And they are very active in the podcast listener space. I just always forget about LinkedIn. Like funny. I very rarely am on there. I reach out to some people that seem to like I think that's how we connected, right? Like I reach out to people that are in my space and say, hey, like I would want to hear more about what you're doing, but I always forget to post. It's terrible.
I know it's and some people are still heavy into Facebook and that's their jam, where I'm kind of like, I'm half in there. Like I have my LinkedIn on all the time, DMing people all the time, great conversations, and every business and every person is so different. So it's like, it's not like, oh, you've got to bail on this and hop on this train. It's whatever makes sense for you.
Yeah, you know, and when you look, it's like anything else. The same as podcasts as well. When we talk about growing a show, like you have to do the work. Like if you work it the right way, it'll work for you.
Yeah.
I think LinkedIn years ago kind of gave me a bad taste because everybody reaching out was just immediately trying to sell me something. And like I don't. By the way, I understand that that's how business works. Like you have to try and sell something, but it's the way they go about it, right? Like I'm all about paying for something if we can build a relationship and do all these things. But it just gave me a bad taste. And I think that's kind of still in the back of my head, but because of this conversation, I'm going to go double down on LinkedIn, and see what comes of it. And we'll report back in 6 months and we can talk a little bit more about podcasting on LinkedIn.
And I'll try to do better with Instagram and
perfect.
Do more of those darn stories.
Yeah.
But I just want to quickly touch upon the point that you said, because I just want to make sure that people heard it, is that stories are like staying top of mind for those that are following you already, but reels are going out to people that aren't following you. So you're able to tap into a newer audience.
Yeah,
which
100%.
Is amazing.
Yeah. And I, you know, when we talk about, you know, driving traffic to the podcast, your story is still the best play. You can't put a clickable link in the description on Instagram. So therefore they have to go from your post to your profile, click the link that's in the bio. And then I am like most people, they have a link tree, right? So you click it and there's all these other links they got to go find and click again. It just doesn't work. But if they're already following you, right. If they're already following you and it's a simple click right to Apple Podcasts right in your story, done. A lot more people are going to click on that than do all those steps.
I know. Make it easy. So what would you say are some mistakes that people do with reels?
Oh, that's a great question. Not formatting them the right way. That's a really big one. Like people they're like, well, I made it into a reel. Right. But if your video is like this and the rest is blackout space, it doesn't play to the algorithm of iTunes. They're not going to show it to a lot of people. So you want to make sure it fits in properly.
Yeah.
That's number one. Number two, people who make the mistake that they think that if it looks a certain way, it's all of a sudden going to get a ton of views. Your content actually has to be good, right?
Yeah.
So what you see now of like with and we do this for clients. So like the words popping up with images, right? As the images pop up when they're talking. That was used by, I forget his name, some guy named Robert something with a huge following, and it blew up for him. And so everybody started to do that. Well, if your content's not good, nobody's going to care. So you want to make sure that your reels are your best content. People try so hard to be like, oh no, for the best content, go to the podcast. No. Show them up front, show them your hand, show them all the good stuff, because that's what's bringing them in. And so the content has to be good. That's probably the biggest mistake. Like you can have all the fancy words pop up and the different colors and images and funny things, but nobody's going to care if the content's terrible. So make sure you're grabbing the best content possible.
Agreed. And I won't say who, but I've seen one of the high-end entrepreneurs out there, and a lot of his reels are honestly just like waves behind it and then one of his recycled like quotes or posts. And to me, I'm like, those are cool and they're like a quick win to like quickly grab someone's attention. But to me, I'm like, you also have to mix it with like people talking so they see your personality and like get like a full like nugget of information, and just kind of like not just to do one thing and then that's it. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, 100%. And I think, you know, a lot of what we're talking about is that first P of platform building. You're not going to build a platform unless people see who you are. Yeah. You're not going to build a platform off of quote cards and, you know, the images of your guests or whatever you decide to throw up there. And I've done that too, by the way. I've done the tweet thing, make it into a square and put a video behind it. And honestly, that's out of I need to do a post and I feel lazy right now. So the platform building side of it is they want to see your face. People want to see you be engaged, do all those things. So get over yourself, get on camera. And create the content, because a lot of it, honestly, like, and this is a whole self-development conversation, but it's that self-doubt and that's limiting beliefs that's creeping in if people aren't putting themselves on camera and then putting it out there. So you have to do the work in order to get over that. And because if you really do want to build a platform, if you really do want to make the impact you're trying to make in the world, you have to show up. People need to see your face. That's what builds trust. And that'll help you in the long run for sure.
So true. And I am sadly a little guilty of that. Justin.
Look, we all are, right? Like if I'm a little puffy, I'm like, I don't want to record a video.
I know my hair's
like,
not done right
that's just the
today.
reality.
Yeah.
But I always go back to the idea that like I have a mission to help inspire and change the world in a way. And so how selfish of me not to show up just because I feel like I'm a little fat that day.
True. You know? So true. And it's like I connect with people that like I see their face and I can read, like, see into their eyes, or like you just get a feel for people, right? And I know people work with me once I connect them and I'm on Zoom and I talk to them and strategize or whatever. It's just so much better to build that relationship and trust right off the bat. And so it's what works, honestly, for converting and building those relationships.
100%. And look, podcasting is the greatest networking tool of all time.
Yeah.
And as a podcaster, if you're not utilizing it in that way, you're missing a huge, powerful point of podcasting. Is really the networking, right? I've gotten clients out of my podcast by chance. I don't ever try and sell them anything. It just happened. And some of my best friends I met through my podcast, and they've gone on to, some of them have become business partners. Some of them have spoken at my events, and it's all because I sat down and especially early on, a lot of the guests would be like, "We're not doing video, are we?" And I was like, no, I have to see your face or it's going to be the worst conversation you've ever had.
Yeah.
And so that gets them on. It helps them open up, be more vulnerable. And then you can build that friendship or whatever relationship you're trying to build with them through that conversation. Because look, if I were, and let's talk straight business, right? If you're looking for clients, the greatest way to do it is to interview your perfect client, right? So if I reached out to a CEO of an organization and I was like, hey, I want to tell you about this great product I have. Can we chat? You're going to be ghosted, right? Or you're just going to straight up say no. But if you reach out and go, hey, I love what you're doing within your organization. I'd love to have you on my podcast and talk more about it. And then for 45 minutes, you talk to them, you learn their story, you build rapport, you do all these things. Like if you can't close them after that as a client, you're in the wrong business.
Agreed.
And so it is the greatest tool, even as a lead gen tool, if you want to use it for that. But on the flip side, make sure you're always serving your audience. Don't just use it completely as a lead gen. Make sure it's a conversation that serves your audience.
Absolutely. And it is a good sales tool, but don't use it as a sale. Like,
it should be organic, right? Like it is to build a relationship. If a sale happens because of it, great.
I know. And to me, I'm like, just be a normal human being, man. Like, I'd rather chat with someone that I know I could have a beer with like later and curse over something than like be some like starchy little corporate meeting. I'm like, forget it.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, I know obviously you create this content for your clients. So just so people kind of understand from a framing point of view, what do you do, Justin, and where can they find you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I do a bunch of things, but in the podcast space, I do own a company called Podbrand, where we help podcasters affordably create content in order to make a larger impact in the world. And they can check that out at podbrand.io is the website.
Yeah.
So they can go there, check it out. We've made it as affordable as possible. I promise you that I don't make a ton off of it. It's really about impact driven business. And that's really what we wanted to create for people, because we understand that the content creation game can be a struggle. So there's that. And if they're an entrepreneur and they're looking to grow their business, obviously Growth Now movement's all about that. And so I do live events, whether it be smaller retreats or immersions or bigger events for entrepreneurs. And they can get information at growthnowevents.com. They can check that out. And that's where we can do deep dives, help them grow their business, help them grow their reach, their impact, and their income.
I love it. I love what you're doing in the space, and you're such a genuine person and you're so giving, and I'm so happy to know you.
Yeah, same for you. Thank you so much for having me on. This conversation was great. I think we talked longer than you expected, but that's a good thing. That's okay.
Right? It's all good. I don't have hard stops.
I love it. Thank you so much. This was great.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. All right. See you later.